All right, well, this could be live right now. This new system with Facebook. Here we go. We're live now. This is beautiful. And it's Reverend Matthew here with another Facebook Live. And today I'm going to talk about kind of two topics. And hair's a little crazy today, so just going with it. And two topics that I think are really important to touch on here. And one is this concept that birds of a feather flock together, as the saying goes. And I think I originally heard that from Abraham Hicks, but pretty sure that's kind of a generic term. And then this other idea of awakening in the dream, and really super essential concept that I think we all, if you're on the spiritual journey, if you're on this freedom oriented journey, and from my vantage point, the only, and this is me, this is just my viewpoint on life, and it's not to say it's right or wrong or good or bad or that everyone has to agree with it. I strongly suggest that nobody listen to what I have to say in terms of, a belief or dogma. Listen with your heart and use your discretion. Um, discriminate with your ideas. Does it make sense to you? And if it does, then don't stop there. You got to prove it to yourself that it actually works in the world practically. And one of the key things that I've come to realize, and I'll work with the second idea first, is when we're awakening in this dream, so to speak, this dream world, this movie, and more we're realizing that, hey, it's not what I thought it was. And I mean, that's really all that awakening in the dream has to mean initially, is like, hey, this isn't what I thought it was. Right? The people that I thought were the way they were, they're not necessarily that way. People change, right? I was just speaking with a friend, and her mom's going through a situation where a health situation involving some form of brain a cognition challenge, and she literally flipped personalities like 180 degrees. And we go through these things in our lives where that the switch just flicks and things can instantly change, and we're in the midst of that with this virus situation, and we've all seen that firsthand. And initially for the ego, that's really scary. That seems like such a big deal. And if we just realize, wait a sec, when things feel surreal, like totally different from the norm, then that's a great opportunity to dive in and really contemplate this reality, right? Is this reality what I thought it was? And as we get into that, then that starts to pave a pathway of awakening in the dream. Now, most people just go into fear mode. Some people accept it as a new normal. I'd encourage you not to accept it as a new normal. I would say, hey, just take it for what it is, and that's using it for a positive purpose. And that's really the basis of all creation in terms of taking responsibility, is deciding, hey, whatever I'm faced with right now, whatever I'm looking at, I'm just going to use it for a positive purpose anyway. And when we make that decision, suddenly the floodgates are opened and we are brought to a new place of peace and quiet and calm. When we decide to be fearful and resist against what the world is showing us, then instantaneously we end up in a place of a fear position. And we've lost our power at that point. We've given our power away, and we can always reclaim it. That's the beautiful thing. And then the whole concept of waking up in the dream is realizing that you never really did give your power away, because the moment you reclaim it, the entire past has changed, the entire future has changed, and you might go back and forth like a yo-yo, right? It's instead of yo-yo dieting, it's like yo-yo spirituality, right? Where you give your power away and take it back. But that's my main point too, in terms of what is real spirituality. What does it really entail? To me, it's about letting go of our attachments and aversions to the world. And it's about surrendering ourselves to God, and the realization that God is the ultimate reality, and anything that isn't mirroring that ultimate reality, let's surrender it. Let's give it up. Let's let it go. Let's release it, because it's just baggage, right? Not for any other reason. There's no judgment about it. It's just baggage. Like my mentor Lester Levinson exclusively said that thoughts are just perturbances. They just detract from our quality of life, having a thought. And a lot of people hear that and think that's kind of strange, and I could certainly commiserate with that. If I hadn't been studying this for 10 plus years in terms of my spiritual path, really starting with A Course in Miracles, which is completely left field to what a lot of New Age ideas are out there. It's close to Buddhism, but it still differs in some significant ways. From my understanding, I'm no expert on Buddhism. So the idea here is, awakening in the dream is a gradual process. And as I mentioned before, one of my mentors taught me that by the inch it's a cinch, by the yard it's hard. So when you progress by inches in this, it's easier to awaken. Some people, they learn about this idea that the world isn't, what they thought it was. It's kind of like the Matrix, or the, Curtain of Oz is somewhat revealed to them, and then they want to reject the world. And I went through that process, and that doesn't work, right? You can only accept the world. And it's through giving the world love and approval that we then transcend it. And that's really an important point, because, the way home is through love and approval, not by resistance. And this, the idea of birds of a feather flock together is really interesting, and I'm gonna briefly touch on this and potentially do deeper conversation in the group. But my spiritual journey's been, I don't know what to say about it, really. Just totally not what I would have ever expected. My entire life has been totally not what I would have ever expected, and I don't know if a lot of people live that way. Some people have a vision in mind. Like my dad, for instance, he had a vision as to what he wanted, and in some ways it's even better probably than he ever imagined. Right now he's living in California because of his vision for his job and his career, and that's likely more than he ever thought possible, going back 20 years or so, 30 years. But for me, it's just been totally not random. It's not random, but the idea of what I thought my life would be, that's not how it's turned out. And maybe it's because I never really had a concrete thought or a concrete vision, and that's all part of the development process. But for instance, finding Gail and being in a relationship with Gail, which to me, all of this is orchestrated from a higher place, and inevitably we do come into contact with the higher vision for ourselves, and then it's easier to consciously intend that. And that can be a lot of fun, actually, because that's when we're really achieving a certain level of mastery in the world. But coming across Gail and being in a relationship with her was certainly never something that I saw coming until it was here. And then it was here, and it was magnificent. 5 years where I grew and prospered in so many ways. And noticing her spiritual journey and the conflicts there, and the dichotomy between both of our approaches to life was really fascinating, because while there was this solid love between both of us, right, and just this kind of commitment on a very deep level, and it's tough to explain where that comes from, right? Some people say that's built over time, but it's almost like it was instantaneous, and it certainly was built over a period of time, more and more, but it was there to begin with. And from my perspective, that's a soul agreement, right? You've had other lives with these people, and so we are picking up where we left off. That's how I see it. That's how it's been shown to me. It makes sense. But it's still part of the story. It's still part of the movie. It's just like a higher level, if you want to call it that, of the movie of life. And in witnessing Gail's conflicts and struggles with the whole kind of spiritual journey, because she was really into it for a year or two, and then That was shortly after her separation. Well, she had a depression after her separation, and then she had this spiritual journey she was on for a year or two, and her best friend was one of the most spiritually inclined people I've ever met, which was kind of ironic because Gail, while had a deep unconscious connection to Source, in terms of her kind of practicing and weaving it in to every area of life, was not there. That was one of her challenges, one of her themes. And specifically, A Course in Miracles, which was a big deal for me on my journey, she totally didn't get it. The languaging, just nothing, not a grain of, not comprehension, but just totally not her vibe. And I get that because it's written in a Christian type of dialogue, albeit its principles are much more Buddhist in nature. And if you're not ready to hear this stuff, if you don't have something within you that's almost like a yearning in a sense of for peace, right? Real peace, right? Knowing that, despite everything I see in the world, there's things that are, we can have happy experiences and things are beautiful and all that. But there's there's got to be something more here. There's got to be something more. That was always my kind of lifelong thing. And we did not share perspectives on this, and there was one point where I was sharing it with her, and it was I think it was a Valentine's Day in 2016, maybe Valentine's Day 2016, maybe 2017, but I think 2016. And I was sharing some of the course with her, and she couldn't take it anymore. It's like, I'm done, and she'd say this thing where I'm done, and it'd be like, I get scared. I'm like, does that mean you're done the relationship, or are you just done with the conversation? Of course I'm laughing now. At the time I was like, oh my god. It turned out to be this we had this argument about A Course in Miracles, ridiculous, right? It's hilarious looking back on it. And just not understanding where we both were in our spiritual journey and how to bridge that gap. And at that point I made the decision that I wasn't going to share it with her anymore, because I loved her more than I loved A Course in Miracles, or at least that was the priority for me, was that relationship. And and then over the years I saw her come close to kind of skirt around freedom, the idea of being free, but never fully committing. And it was not a huge part of our relationship, actual spiritual work. In and of itself, it was a hugely spiritual evolutionary experience for me and for her. But we didn't really necessarily do a lot of spiritual work together. We did our fair amount over the years. We took neurolinguistic programming master practitioner level together, and we shared some of that together. But even then, there was always didn't quite work. And then I came to realize that in my partnership with her, I didn't really want to be doing that stuff. I just preferred to spend time with her. And in the last probably 3 years, certainly 2 years of the relationship, it was much nicer just to spend time with her, but rather than talk about spiritual things or what have you. And that's we'd have somewhat spiritual conversations, and then she'd get lost in it, and it wouldn't go anywhere. So we just stopped that. And it was a evolutionary process for me, as I said, because all those triggers I would release on them, and at the time I didn't have the same methodology that I'd learned from Lester about releasing, but I still innately had studied it in other ways, and had innately understood it in my own way. And it was powerful. And to see how, and it's not like all her friends were this way, but to see how she kind of insulated herself with friends that kind of had similar thinking. And it was really interesting because looking back on it now, I can kind of see, and this isn't a judgment or anything, this is just me reflecting, but I can just kind of see my level of awareness at the time, where I was, as to where I am now looking back on it. And I could see her level of awareness and how she viewed the world and things. And I'm gonna speak directly in terms of the ego. And I can plainly see how that personality ego construct was playing out for her. And this is not like we're all doing this. We're all humans, right? We've all been through it at some point or going through it. If you're watching this video and if you made it this far, 15 minutes in, obviously there's a deep resonance in some way, right? But this is certainly not for everybody. And I found that out very well today. And that's sort of the story that I'm sharing. And now that it's 15 minutes in, if you made it this far, then the story will be powerful. Because I was speaking with one of her friends today, and I'm naive. I've always been kind of a naive person, just making assumptions potentially going in. And I mean, I'm observant of my environment and conscious of that, and I do my best to put the pieces of the puzzle together, and sometimes I'm bang on, sometimes it makes a lot of sense. And if I take time to ask spirit ahead of time or meditate ahead of time, then I can often get insights ahead of time. But there's some situations that it's like it doesn't feel like a big deal, and so why would I do that, right? Like if you're crossing the street and the walking man's up, you don't really meditate for 10-15 minutes before you cross. You're like, well, the walking man's there, so that generally means I'm going to walk. And but inevitably some people still have challenges with that. They're walking, but there's cars coming, and I'm sure there's accidents that happen. So despite everything being obvious and looking like that's the way it should look, and then you pursue, you go forward, there can still be surprises. And that's what happened when I was speaking with one of her friends today. I was under the impression that her friend wanted freedom, wanted like real spiritual freedom. And so when we started the conversation, it was initially set up as kind of what I'm calling a releasing session. It's just to help people who may be dealing with some form of stress to release that stress, let it go, and experience a lighter, happier, more free state of mind. That's what I call freedom. And anyway, so immediately on this call, I normally would just dive right into the process, but I could immediately feel that it wasn't quite ready to do that. So we were talking for a long time and hit this point where it was like apparent that they weren't even interested in freedom at all. They weren't interested. They had stresses going on in their life and challenges and suffering, self-proclaimed suffering, but made the decision, like verbally explained, that they would rather hang on to their suffering as part of their human experience because it didn't feel like they needed to do anything with it. They were just going to experience it, and despite the obvious kind of burden and baggage and stress that it's potentially bringing them, from my perspective, just by voice tonality, by framing of the circumstances, things of that nature. And again, this is totally my lens. They really decided, hey, I don't want this, right? In fact, everything you're saying is really irritating, and any exposure I've had to this process in the past, I found it to be irritating. And despite the contradictions of, them acknowledging how, what they'd experienced in the past, and it actually made them feel lighter, happier, and more free, but that's still not the path they wanted to go down. And I noticed the same thing with Gail, is that she, in her journey, she gets some exposure to these things that work, but then kind of turn away from it, and until seeing it in her, this individual today, it hadn't really fully hit home to me how the ego structure works. And this is not a personal thing at all, right? This has nothing to do with Gail or her friend at all, right? It's it's just human nature, and we all go through this process. I fully identified on this phone call today with going through this process myself, and it's not an age thing. I'll call it a spiritual maturity thing, but that word can be used as a judgment, so that's not how I mean it. But I just in terms of our awareness, where we're at, and it was so fascinating to essentially observe myself the way I was years ago, but also to see that in Gail and to realize, wow, number one, people, who are connected, on the same wavelength, they insulate and kind of, I'll say justify their storyline to one another. And I saw that, I saw how Gail had kind of done that. And again, not all of her friends necessarily fit into this category. I'm kind of generalizing, but this is general to all of humanity. And then from there, I saw it in myself, of course, right? And I wasn't really bothered by the conversation. I felt it a little draining. Certainly felt, as we got into it and it was apparent that, I was slamming my head against a brick wall. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't even realize that's, the circumstance I put myself into until about halfway through the call. And then it's like, wow, there's some people just, they're not, whether you say they're not ready, whatever. They just don't want that freedom. Like, they want their freedom to come in a certain neat package, and I totally get that because, they want it to look a certain way or sound a certain way. And I was that way, I was totally that way, right? I would only listen to certain people. It had to be a certain process. It had to feel good in a certain way. And then when Gail had her situation with, cancer, her journey with cancer, and I was having all this anger and frustration, initially dealing with her mom and, managing Gail, and there's a lot going on. And I just said, you know what, I can't show up this way in the world anymore. I gotta release this. And, and I was led back to Lester's work, which I'd encountered initially in 2018. I was led back to it and followed through on it this time because my back was up against the wall. I'm letting this stuff go. And that's really where we have to get to in our development, is to realize, hey, my back's up against the wall. Like, I've got no other choice other than to release. And if the world's really not, as I thought it was, and I can allow it to be something other than what I thought it was, then does it really matter the form that my spirituality takes on? And that's the thing with A Course in Miracles, and that Gail struggled entirely with, because the form it came in, and it was just so different. And I get that completely, because it took me like 2 years to kind of get into it. And that's only because that 10 years ago when I was introduced to it, my back was up against the wall then. I was like, man, my life, I was dealing with a police encounter at the time where I'd been assaulted by a police officer on the side of the freeway, and I didn't know what my future held. Could get jail time, could get some big financial fine. It was a scary time for me at the time. So my back was up against the wall. So I'm like, you know what? If this Course in Miracles thing works, I'm just going to do it, right? If it can really give me freedom and liberty and peace of mind, I'm just going to do it. I don't care what it looks like. And that's really where we have to get in our spiritual development. And this, a bit of a long story to get here, but if you follow it along, it's well worth it. Because you got to go through the motions, right? Life isn't, from my perspective, it's not a scorecard, I once asked my dad about his view of life, and he said he views life as a golf scorecard, and the only thing that matters is the numbers on the card. And from my perspective, that ain't the way it works. That ain't the way it works, right? When we're in heaven and we go through our life review, the outcomes are just part of the journey, and it's a snapshot, and the outcomes are just as relevant as the entire journey. And if you go on this journey with me, if you follow the story and relate it to yourself in your own way, and follow the trigger points and release on them, this story in of itself could be your ticket to freedom, right? Because every opportunity is the same opportunity. And that's what people don't get. They don't understand that every moment's the same moment viewed from a different perspective. And if that's absolutely true, that means all you got is this moment right now. And if you use it to the best of your ability, that means you're taking 100% responsibility and you're using it for what it's good for. So if it's bothering you, if you're not completely at peace with it, you release on it and you find your freedom. And, that's exactly what I had the opportunity to experience today, and seeing myself, in a clearer way than I've ever seen myself before. Seeing Gail's conundrum as she struggled. She struggled with her spiritual journey, with her spirituality, with putting the pieces together, with weaving it into her life. And and I have her permission to talk about this from Spirit. I mean, I'm connected with her. This is just her journey. I mean, she wants people to know what she went through as a human being in her human experience, so that others can benefit from it. Right? When we keep these things secret, you know, I learned from Dr. John Demartini. I've learned some wonderful things from him. Gail and I did a weekend breakthrough with him in Family Day weekend 2017. Family Day is a holiday in Canada, February 2017. And the one thing though that I remember pretty well verbatim, he said, make your privates public. And he wasn't talking about private parts or, you know, body parts. He was saying the things that we want to keep most secret, and obviously you're going to use discretion with this, of course, right? But the things that we think, you know, we should keep hidden from the world, let's actually put them on the table, and for teaching purposes, right? For sharing purposes, for reflection and relatability purposes. And so that's what this is like, hey, number one, noticing how we insulate ourselves with people that think the same way as us. And we do that to protect ourselves, right? To get a sense of approval and safety and control from external sources. And then also notice, you know, what bothers you, what irritates you, because those are your tickets to freedom. That was the number one thing that stood out in this conversation with Gail's friend today is, you know, they were saying how some of this stuff just, you know, like really irritated them. And I'm like, that's the ticket. That's fantastic, right? Pop the champagne, so to speak. If you're irritated by something, you know you're on the right track, right? Because if you're not bothered by it and it fits into your paradigm, you're not growing. Now, that being said, for me, I realized, you know, in a more profound way than I ever have before, is that everyone's on their own path, and non-interference with form. That was kind of a mandate that I learned through A Course in Miracles. Is like, we're not here to interfere with people. We're not here to force them. But I still caught myself in that conversation, almost into like, you know, trying to convince this person about being free. And it's like, well, you know, if they don't want it, they don't want it. Now that's where the naivete was, right? I just assumed that everybody wants freedom, and they'll claim their freedom no matter what package it comes in, because once you're free, you're free. You know, why does it matter what it looks like? But not everyone is at that stage, right? Not everyone is in that state of mind. So I think the main takeaway from all this is number one, identifying where are you insulating yourself, and you're protecting yourself. Just, you got to be honest, right? You're doing that to protect yourself. You know, the other takeaway from this is what irritates you most in life, and recognizing, hey, that's my ticket home, right? When I release that, when I use it, the law of utilization, when I use it for what it's good for, then it'll take me to where I need to be next. It's like in a video game, you know, that's what this is. That's all this is. The whole structure of a video game is based on our physical reality, right? You level up, you level up, you level up, right? The challenges seem to get bigger, but you have more tenacity, you have more resilience, you have more tools in your tool belt. And of course, most video games have an element of violence. This one does not need to have any element of violence to it. There's people that choose that, and of course they're free to choose, but, you know, knowing that you can choose your freedom. Again, that was another big point of this conversation that I had today with this person, is they didn't seem to think they could choose their own freedom. And that was really fascinating to me. And I identify with that in terms of like, when it's your time, and we're all in this karmic cycle. But once you awaken to the idea that, hey, I can choose to be loving and positive, or I can choose to beat myself up and be negative, like, that's a choice. Like, freedom is a choice, right? And even if you only get a glimpse of it for the moment, you feel that, you know, ounce of relief or levity, you know, at least you're getting a taste of it. And, you know, the ego will, not that it fights tooth and nail, but it's not designed to go towards freedom. It's just not designed that way. It's designed to survive. It's designed to look out for threats. And, you know, that's just a choice, right? Do you want to live that way? Do you want to live in that ego mind ongoing, or do you want more? And that's what awakening in the dream's all about, is to recognize, hey, there's so much more here for me than just the survival and the, getting by. And there's beauty in everything. There's perfection in everything, right? We're in this space right now, this virus situation. There's protests, right? Imagine if it was all perfect. Imagine if it was all just going according to plan. And there's nothing that we needed to do to change it. And imagine that if everyone in your life who you had a judgment towards, imagine if you could just drop that and knew that there was nothing you needed to do to change what you see on the movie screen. And then imagine if you didn't think there was anything you needed to do to change the judgment. You could just say yes to the judgment. Just accept it fully. Right? Wouldn't that be an easier way to live? And we get that every day. We get opportunities to go into that space. So, I encourage you to use what life gives you. When life gives you lemons, turn it into lemonade. And if you're living right, you'll notice that things taste a little sour, from time to time, maybe every day, and then you just release it, let it go, and it's and you're good. And you move on to the next experience. And if all we had was our human experience, one life, one opportunity, then we'd all probably live a lot differently. Or would we? I mean, a lot of people believe that, and they still live in a scarcity mindset. But from my perspective, this is infinite. We're infinite beings, and we've already had many lives, most of us anyway. And it's just another experience. It's another level in the video game. It's another chapter in the book. And when we just kind of sit back and allow things to unfold in a really magnificent way, while knowing that we can always choose to be loving and positive about whatever we're experiencing, and we can allow ourselves to experience that more and more, and we truly claim ownership with that as a choice, it's from that quiet place that we then know what are the best action steps to take. So, I'm Reverend Matthew. That was a longer conversation, but enjoyable for me. And if you followed the whole thing, congratulations on that. But even if you caught a glimpse of it, we're diving deep into the Voice to Spirit community. You can find the link in the comments. You can also find the information regarding my 10 Steps to Freedom case study. That's number 10 steps, number 2, freedom, 10 Steps to Freedom case study. And that's a powerful experience for anyone looking for deep transformation and change, and ultimately freedom on every level. Freedom from the dream, freedom from any form of worry, doubt, or fear. And that translates into every area of life, because it's a mirror. If you fix the inner cause, the outer starts to reflect in a more magnificent way. So, God bless you all. Check us out in the Voice to Spirit community, and I'll see you on the next live. Bye for now.